Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
You've done enough. Mark, time for a new chapter. That's the sentence that hit like a slow-motion slap across the face, the kind that doesn't sting at first, just confuses you. I was sitting there in that overly beige HR room, the one with the fake plant that had collected dust since the Bush administration, staring at Cheryl from HR like maybe she was kidding. But she wasn't smiling. Just this tight, manufactured expression like she was bracing for turbulence on a plane she didn't know how to land. Next to her sat some guy I didn't recognize, legal, maybe? Or just backup, in case I flipped the desk. I didn't. Not that day. I shook Cheryl's hand because I was raised right, stood up without saying much, and they slid a white envelope across the table like it was a damn wedding card. I didn't open it. I just nodded, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and felt something hard in the pocket. That USB drive. A little insurance policy I'd thrown in there months ago, more paranoia than planned at the time. Now, it felt like the only thing I actually owned. The hallway outside HR was too quiet, like everyone had heard the whispers and decided this was a good day to work remote. My office door was already ajar. That's when I saw him, Trent, sitting in my damn chair. My chair. This guy, 28 maybe, hair gelled like he had stock in it, clicking through something on my machine like it belonged to him. No eye contact. No sorry, man, or tough break. Just sat there like he'd been waiting for me to leave all along. And Carl? The VP I'd pulled all-nighters for? Who I'd covered for when he forgot the entire pricing model during the Soren pitch. He walked past me in the hallway like I was invisible. No handshake. No, thanks for keeping this place together during the breach in 2017. Just eyes forward, like he couldn't even risk meeting my gaze. I walked past the break room, past the whiteboard still covered in my diagrams, and started boxing up what was left of 19 years and 11 months. Photos of my kids, a coffee mug that said, #1firefighter, even though I was never a firefighter, it was a Father's Day gift. A laminated comic strip someone had taped to my monitor back in '09. The room was empty, the whole floor quiet, and I swear I could still hear the sound of my own keyboard clacking in my head like muscle memory that hadn't gotten the memo. On the way out, I stopped at the front desk, looked at the new receptionist. She didn't even know my name. That's how fast the place moved on. I paused by the glass doors, looked back once, and realized I hadn't even gotten a damn goodbye email. 19 years and they couldn't be bothered to send a company-wide note that I was leaving. Maybe they thought that would make it cleaner, less dramatic, easier to forget. Now, let me be clear about something. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't the loudest guy in the room, and I sure as hell didn't play the politics game like Carl and his inner circle did. But I showed up every day. I trained 5 separate project managers, rebuilt the inventory backend twice, and was the guy they called every time something was on fire, sometimes literally. When the server melted down in the middle of the night in 2015, I was the one on the floor at 2 in the morning patching things together with a second-hand fan and 3 Red Bulls. I didn't complain then. I don't even remember if I logged the overtime. But none of that mattered last Thursday. And here's the real kicker. If they'd waited one more month, I would have hit the 20-year mark. Full pension vest. Complete benefits rollover. They knew that. Hell, Carl had even joked about it during the last holiday party. Mark, just don't retire on us the day you get your watch. He laughed. I laughed. Everyone laughed. Except now I realize maybe that wasn't a joke. Maybe it was the plan all along. The severance package? It was decent on paper, I guess. But it came with that little clause they all have now: sign here, don't sue us, and don't talk smack on LinkedIn. As if I'd ever air dirty laundry on LinkedIn. No, if I was going to talk, it wouldn't be with hashtags and heart emojis. You ever spend 2 decades building something? Watching it grow, mentoring interns who turned into directors, cleaning up the messes the hotshots made, and then get tossed out like you were nothing but a temp? You ever watch some guy with no idea what he's doing slide into your chair and start clicking like he built the damn platform? What would you do if your boss blindsided you like this, right before your 20-year mark? Would you walk away or start plotting? Because I'll be honest, as I stood in my garage that night, staring at the closed box with my name written in Sharpie, I wasn't thinking about moving on. I wasn't thinking about the next chapter Cheryl mentioned so cheerfully. I was thinking about that USB drive, the one with the emails, the codebase, the unreleased test results, the archived chats Carl had accidentally deleted. And that's when something inside me shifted. This wasn't going to end in some Facebook post about new beginnings. No, this was going to be something else. I didn't know it yet, but by Monday morning, the same people who shoved me out the door were going to be calling me back in. Only this time, I wasn't coming to help. I was coming to clean house. The first few days after the firing were quieter than I expected, the kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace, but instead sharpens every sound around you. The dripping faucet in the kitchen, the muffled hum of the neighbor's lawnmower, the occasional chirp of a text notification I didn't care to read. I sat in my garage most nights, pretending to reorganize tools I hadn't touched in months, staring at that USB drive like it might just whisper something if I stared long enough. The truth is, I didn't even plug it in for 3 days, not because I forgot, but because part of me didn't want to know what I already suspected was on it. You see, when you spend 20 years with a company, you don't just collect projects and contacts and half-used notebooks. You collect patterns. You start to hear things in how people don't say them. You learn how to smell panic in an email and spot lies in a sentence too polished. That USB was never meant to be revenge. Back when I made the copy, I was just covering my ass. Carl had started getting sloppy with the approvals, shortcuts had become standard operating procedure, and we were being pushed to move fast and look shiny, as he once put it, a phrase that still makes my stomach turn. But now that little thumb-sized piece of plastic felt radioactive in my hand. I finally sat down at my home desk, same monitor I'd used to work overtime from home, same chair with the squeaky armrest I kept saying I'd fix. I plugged the drive in and opened a folder labeled simply Insurance. I wasn't prepared for how much I'd saved. Full server logs, code snapshots, test results from 2 quarters ago. And then the real gems, the email threads. There was one from Carl dated 6 months earlier. Subject line, pre-launch adjustments. I remembered that project. It was supposed to be a seamless integration of our customer database with the new predictive analytics engine. Problem was, the engine wasn't just unfinished, it was wrong. Predicting garbage, misfiring results, and when I brought that up in the QA meeting, Carl hit me with that same grin he always used when he was lying through his teeth. Don't overcomplicate things, Mark, he said. Just make it look good on paper. I made a note of that email and moved on. The deeper I went, the angrier I got. We hadn't just shipped sloppy, we'd shipped dangerous. There was a bug in the data handling module that could easily trigger a full customer data overwrite under certain conditions, and instead of fixing it, they just buried it. I documented the issue and submitted a patch, but Carl pulled it from the release at the last minute. We'll handle it in Q2, he said. That was 9 months ago. They were prepping a new product now. I'd seen hints of it in the emails before I left. And from the looks of things, they were building it on top of that same flawed foundation, meaning the entire structure was balancing on top of a time bomb, and none of them had the technical depth to see it. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, long and heavy, not out of relief, out of pressure. This wasn't just a bruised ego anymore. This was negligence, the kind that gets people sued or worse. And maybe that's when the shift started, when the sadness and humiliation started to curdle into something else, resolve. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily they had pushed me out. Not just quietly, but without even a sliver of respect. Like I was a replaceable cog. And maybe that would have been easier to swallow if they hadn't replaced me with a guy like Trent. Someone who called version control, that Git thingy, and asked me how to debug an error message with emojis in it. This was who Carl thought could fill my shoes. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old LinkedIn inbox and searched for an old contact, Julian Knox. Julian had been our lead database architect back in the early days before the first acquisition. Smart guy. Quick-wit. Got out before things got ugly. Last I heard, he'd landed a senior role at a competitor, smaller company, but smart people, focused product line. And rumor had it they were eyeing the same market space we were about to launch into. I sent a simple message. You still owe me a coffee. You around? He replied within 20 minutes. Name the time. I'll bring the good stuff. We met at a diner halfway between our houses, the kind with sticky menus and waitresses who remember your name even if you don't tip big. We didn't talk shop at first. Just caught up. Talked about kids, bad bosses, the usual. But eventually, I eased into it. Tough year. Julian asked. You could say that, I said. Got let go 2 weeks before my 20th. He winced like I'd told him I lost a dog. Ouch. That's not just cold. That's deliberate. I think so too, I said, then paused. You still tracking our market? Julian nodded slowly. I hear things. Why? I didn't pull out the USB. Not yet. But I did say this. You might want to tell your engineers to double-check anything they try to match feature-wise in Q3. What they're basing their platform on, it's built on sand. Julian leaned forward just a bit, not enough to make a scene, but enough to let me know I had his attention. You thinking of doing anything with that information? I shrugged and sipped my coffee. Just thinking. For now. We finished breakfast like two old war buddies trading stories that no one else would understand. As I walked out of the diner into the morning sunlight, I realized something. I didn't feel broken anymore. Not angry, not yet vindicated, but something else. Alive, maybe. Dangerous, possibly. Because they thought I was gone. But I was still inside the machine. There's a very specific moment in life when you realize you're no longer part of something, but instead standing just outside it, watching it collapse in slow motion while nobody on the inside knows the cracks are already running through the walls. That was the feeling I had as I sat in my basement late at night, surrounded by printouts, post-it notes, and half-drunk mugs of coffee, with the glow of two monitors painting my face like I was some kind of hacker cliché. Except I wasn't hacking anything. I didn't need to. I had knowledge, the kind they'd never imagine I'd use, and it turns out you don't need passwords when you've memorized the blueprints. I started small, like dipping a toe into cold water before diving in. The first move was a short, anonymous email to Julian. No real content, just a hint. I told him to look for pattern failure in the recent test batch from the Lancer module. That was it. No attachments, no context. 3 hours later, he replied from a different account, short and careful. Interesting catch. Would love to see more. That was the green light. I didn't send him files. I'm not an idiot. Instead, I put together a custom website, hosted through 3 layers of obfuscation, built from scratch using a burner laptop and public Wi-Fi. Not because I thought the feds were watching, but because I didn't want Carl's digital bloodhounds sniffing around too early. The site looked plain on purpose. Black background, white courier font, just the word concerned engineer at the top, and a few carefully redacted screenshots from internal QA logs. They showed failure loops, null entries being pushed into production databases, error messages marked as cosmetic, even though they triggered full system freezes during batch processing. Each image was stripped of metadata, and I blurred out timestamps and usernames. I dropped the URL to Julian through a second burner inbox and added a line, "Tell your people to move fast. The system's rotting from the inside." That same week, while keeping up the game of digital footsie with the competition, I reached out to someone else, a name I'd scribbled down months ago during one of Carl's infamous tantrum meetings. He ranted about that smug blogger who thinks she's Woodward and Bernstein, referring to a tech journalist named Dana Moore, who ran a mid-sized industry blog but had recently broken a couple of insider stories that rattled investors. If there was anyone likely to take a nibble, it was her. I didn't go full scorched earth with Dana. Not yet. Instead, I sent her a short message under a pseudonym with a subject line that simply read, "Product integrity concerns." The body was 5 sentences long and included a blurred screenshot of a test log entry from 2 months ago showing a complete client-side data loss, marked in the notes as minor impact, defer fix until post-launch. That alone wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to spark curiosity. Her response came within the day. "Who are you and how much do you have?" I ignored that question and just said, "Let's start with a pattern. This company values perception over stability. The product they're about to ship isn't what they think it is. No threats, no demands, just the truth, selectively delivered, with enough silence to make her lean forward." Meanwhile, I kept monitoring their activity. The public side, anyway. I set alerts for the company's social posts, product page updates, and media coverage. That's how I found it. A video ad on YouTube, barely a minute long, with a grinning face I instantly recognized. There was Trent, sitting in my old office, showing off the product like it was his brainchild, even though 6 months ago he didn't know how to read error logs without someone holding his hand. "Welcome to the future," he said, tapping on a dashboard I'd spent 2 years building, where our platform helps you make smarter decisions instantly. I watched the video 3 times. The first time in disbelief, the second time in pure irritation, and the third time because I noticed something subtle. He demoed a feature I knew wasn't finished. Not just unfinished, entirely unstable. The predictive rollout widget, which had never passed full integration testing. And there he was, demoing it like it was the new sliced bread. Either they were lying in the ad, or worse, they were pushing unstable features live for the sake of marketing optics. And then came the twist. I checked the news feed and saw it. The company had officially filed for IPO with a public launch in just under 3 weeks. The timing wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. Every bug, every buried liability, every shortcut now had the potential to turn into an SEC issue or worse. If I'd stayed quiet, they might have pulled it off long enough to cash in before the house burned down. But now I had leverage. I didn't want to destroy the company, not really. But I wasn't going to let them build an empire on top of lies they shoved under the rug while they kicked me out the back door like old equipment. I'd given them 20 years. They gave me a handshake in silence. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth, about dignity, about showing them that the guy they dismissed as outdated and unnecessary still held the map, and maybe, just maybe, still had the power to flip the script before the credits rolled. The leak had started, and the current was only getting stronger. There's a very specific kind of tension that builds not with explosions or shouting matches, but in silence, in the long breath before the storm breaks, in the twitch of a CEO's eye when an email pings at the wrong time. That's the kind of tension that was beginning to wrap itself around the company I used to call home. They didn't know where the leak was coming from, not yet, but they could feel it, like a slow gas leak you can't smell but know is killing the canary. And I was just sitting back, watching the cracks form under the weight of their own arrogance. It started with a press release, not ours, but the competitors. Julian's team. They pushed out a new feature called SmartFlow Predictive Insights, and if that name sounds familiar, it should. It was a nearly perfect mirror of the feature our company had promised to launch next quarter. The twist? Theirs actually worked. Clean interface. Functional backend. I could tell by the demo clip alone that they'd taken my hint seriously and reverse-engineered what they needed, but without repeating our mistakes. I didn't give them code. I didn't need to. I gave them direction, a flashlight in the dark, and they built the rest with better hands and better ethics. Investors noticed immediately. The timing was too precise to ignore. One outlet ran the headline, "Mid-tier firm outpaces upcoming IPO giant in key feature race," and that was all it took to send internal chatter into overdrive. Board members started making calls. A few analysts downgraded early estimates. Then, to put the cherry on top, Carl decided to double down, because of course he did. I watched the interview twice just to catch the smugness. There he was, sitting in a faux modern office with some marketing intern pretending to be a reporter, saying with a straight face, "We're confident in our product stability. In fact, I'll go on record, we have 0 critical bugs going into launch." He smiled, the way people smile when they're gambling with someone else's money. And maybe that would have passed if he hadn't followed it up with, "Our QA team has certified every feature at or above industry standard. This launch will be flawless." Flawless. The word echoed in my head like a dare. Because I knew what flawless looked like in their world. It looked like patching logs in the middle of the night and marking unreproducible bugs as user error. It looked like Trent clicking buttons in a staged demo while engineers backstage prayed the load balancer didn't choke mid-pitch. So I pulled out one last piece from the vault. The big one. It was a screen recording from a test session dated 2 months before my exit. The QA tester, a junior, probably long gone now, ran a predictive analytics batch on a standard dataset and watched the client interface crash, and then reload with corrupted outputs. Total system failure. The video was silent, but the mouse movements told the whole story: confusion, retrial, and finally a pause that said, "We need to tell someone." Next to that was an internal email chain. Subject line, "Data loss bug. Beta version 4.2. My response had flagged it for hotfix. Carl's reply, 2 hours later, said simply, "Just patch it after launch. Don't delay marketing." I anonymized the names. I blurred the screen ID. But I sent that clip in the email to Dana, the journalist, with the message, he said 0 bugs. The article dropped 48 hours later, and to say it made a splash would be underselling it. The title alone was a punch to the face, flawless or fraud. Whistleblower footage reveals truth behind predictive platform. The piece was careful, sourced anonymously, but sharp. Dana had done her homework. She'd cross-referenced the timestamp with previous PR timelines. She'd included quotes from QA veterans explaining the risks of delayed patching in a launch environment. She even got a statement from an anonymous competitor, Julian, probably saying, "We build ours from the ground up, not on excuses." I almost felt bad. Almost. By noon the day it ran, the company's PR team had issued a rebuttal, which read more like a panic note than a proper statement. By 4, the board had issued a press release promising internal process reviews and product assessments. Carl went suspiciously quiet. Trent deleted his Twitter. And by the end of the week, I was getting messages from old coworkers, ones who'd pretended not to see me when I packed my box, now asking if I had time to talk. But the kicker came Monday morning, just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee in the kitchen. The phone rang. Unknown number. I answered on the second ring, curious but calm. The voice on the other end introduced himself. Board chair, not someone I'd ever spoken to directly before. His tone was polite, but tight. "Mark," he said, like we were old friends, "we've seen some troubling developments. I'd like to meet with you privately. Today, if possible." I didn't say yes right away. I let the silence hang there, long enough for him to fumble a little. Then I responded, "I'm listening." There was a pause, a breath, maybe even a touch of regret in his voice. "We believe you might have some insight into what's gone wrong. We want to discuss how to move forward constructively." Constructively? I nearly laughed. I looked out the window, where the sun was starting to burn through the gray. For the first time in a long time, I felt the balance shift. They weren't in control anymore. The narrative had cracked, and behind the polished glass was rot they couldn't hide. And the man they pushed out? He was suddenly the one with answers. It was a strange thing, walking back into the building where they'd gutted me like a fish just weeks earlier, the same sterile lobby with the same air-freshened chill that always tried too hard to smell like success. Only this time, I wasn't holding a cardboard box full of memories and betrayal. This time, I was holding a thin manila folder and wearing a jacket that fit a little looser since the stress weight had fallen off. The receptionist looked up at me like I was a ghost. I gave her a polite smile, and she glanced down at her screen, trying to match the man in front of her with whatever name had been added to the visitor list under private executive session. The badge she handed me was labeled consultant. I almost laughed. The boardroom looked almost the same, except the energy had shifted. Less arrogant, less full of itself, like someone had finally cracked a window and let in a breeze thick with consequences. The board chair, a man named Greg Holloway, the kind of guy who wore expensive glasses not because he needed them, but because they said, "Trust me," during earnings calls, stood up as I walked in. He shook my hand like it was something he'd always intended to do, like we were old friends reconnecting after a long misunderstanding. We both knew that was bullshit, but I let him play the part. "We appreciate you coming in," he said, motioning toward the chair at the end of the table. I didn't sit right away. I took a slow walk around the room. I skimming the framed vision and values poster still clinging to the wall like it hadn't aged a day. Finally, I sat down and opened the folder. A non-disclosure agreement, of course. An advisory contract. A proposed fee. It was generous, almost flattering, and entirely beside the point. "I didn't come back for money," I said flatly, flipping through the pages like I was browsing a takeout menu. "I came back because I'm the only person who actually knows what's broken around here." Greg nodded, playing calm. "That's exactly why we want your insight. To help us course correct before the IPO window collapses entirely. You were clearly a key part of the foundation." "Foundation?" I repeated, setting the papers aside. "Greg, I was the foundation. Everything you're balancing this empire on has my fingerprints under it. The only reason it's still standing is because I gave enough of a damn not to let it fall apart on my way out." There was a beat of silence. Then another board member, a woman named Ellen, if I remembered right, cleared her throat. "We'd like to offer you a formal position. Strategic operations. High-level oversight. Advisory in title, but with impact." I shook my head and smiled, not because I was flattered, but because they still didn't get it. "I don't want a job," I said, calm but firm. "I want blood." Greg blinked. "Excuse me?" I leaned forward just enough to make my point land. "Carl goes. Today. Not in a month. Not after some optics-friendly reshuffle. He walks, and so does his NDA. And I want a forensic audit on every line Trent's team touched since I left. Every deployment, every database push, every misattributed commit with my initials on it." They exchanged glances, the kind of silent boardroom Morse code that meant, this is politically toxic, but possibly necessary. I could see the resistance crumbling behind Greg's eyes. He wasn't worried about Carl's legacy, he was worried about headlines and shareholder lawsuits. "Carl has already offered to step aside," Greg finally said. Quietly, "We can accept his resignation by week's end." "Today," I repeated, "and I want to watch his name disappear from the internal org chart myself." Within 2 hours, it was done. Carl Bennett, vice president of product and decorated architect of other people's achievements, was gone. No farewell memo. No carefully worded exit statement. Just a silent redaction from the executive directory, like someone had deleted a paragraph that never mattered. Trent? He disappeared just as fast, although less formally. One day he stopped logging in, and the next week his badge deactivated without a press release. The word was that he'd taken a personal leave of absence. I didn't ask. In the weeks that followed, I showed up like a shadow. Never full-time, never for long. I walked through co-bases like a ghost in the attic, pulling open closets they hadn't cleaned in years. The engineers who remained started calling me the janitor, but they did it with a tone that bordered on reverence. I fixed what needed fixing. I flagged what needed burning. I trained one guy I actually liked and told him never to trust the first timeline marketing gives him. He listened, which was more than I could say for half the VPs I used to brief. And then one Friday night, after the dust had settled and the IPO clock had been reset, I found myself back in my garage again, this time with a fresh cup of coffee and the soft hum of my old laptop booting up beside me. I pulled up the company's website. Clicked Leadership. Scrolled down. Carl's name was gone. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smirk. I just took a sip of coffee and sat there, breathing in the quiet that comes when something ugly has been cut away. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was closure with a scalpel, precise and cold. Then came the buzz of my phone. Unknown number. Just a single text. Want to go on record? It was Dana, of course. Still chasing the next thread. Still looking to tie the bow on the story that started with an email and ended with a reckoning. I stared at the screen for a while, thumb hovering over the keyboard, but I didn't type anything. I didn't need to. The people who needed to know already knew. The people who deserved to sweat were already sweating. I put the phone down, closed my laptop, and leaned back in the chair that still creaked in the same spot it always had. I thought about those 2 decades, the hours I gave, the moments I missed with my family, the nights I spent building a system they thought would outlive me. Did I go too far? Maybe. But I didn't write this chapter. They did. I just made sure it had an ending worth reading.